Good evening, everyone. So wonderful to see all of your faces here, some familiar, some new faces. I am Christina Milner. I'm board chair of the World Affairs Council of Kentucky and Southern Indiana. So this is a very somber event. And this is one of the opportunities that you get with World Affairs Council. World Affairs Council believes it has a responsibility to provide more context and information to the general public on global issues and their impacts on the world as well as our lives here. It's a core mission of the World Affairs Council to provide our community with timely and expert analysis on urgent and developing international events. So tonight's event highlights this. So tonight's event, Russia, Ukraine, and the war in Eastern Europe, is done in partnership with the Metro Office of Globalization, the Louisville Free Public Library, Louisville Public Media, and Kentucky Refugee Ministries. And Russia's recent invasion of Ukraine signals a sharp change in modern diplomacy and poses one of the most severe threats of our collective global security. Tonight, we have a couple of guests who will provide us with a deeper understanding of the issues and complexities surrounding this conflict. Ambassador Carrie Cavanaugh is chair of the International Alert, a London-based international peacebuilding NGO, and professor of diplomacy at University of Kentucky's Patterson School of Diplomacy. Natasha Reimer is executive director of the Mulberry International Resources. It's a nonprofit helping at-risk and displaced families in eastern Ukraine. And tonight's discussion will be moderated by Zhouyan Zhao, our executive director of World Affairs Council. And before I bring them up, we also have a distinguished guest here tonight. Mayor Greg Fisher is here, and he would like to open up with a few remarks before we bring up our panelists. Mayor Fisher, could you come forward?
Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to see folks out and such a strong show of interest about such a sad and serious topic. And the World Affairs Council asked me to just begin by talking about what this means to Louisville and why should Louisvillians care about what's taking place halfway across the world. This has been kind of an out-of-body experience, it seems like, for most of us watching this war unfold on social media, on our TV screens, and shaking our heads at the same time saying, can't we do more? How can this just keep going on amidst all of the chaos that we see? So there's a lot of reasons why we should care about this in our city. One, obviously, it's just a blatant threat to the world order when a sovereign nation is invaded the way it's taking place right now. And the pain that the Ukrainians are going through is very difficult to watch. But imagine if you were on the ground. Obviously, much more difficult if you were on the ground. So we call ourselves and aspire to be a compassionate city. So we need to speak up when we see this type of tragedy and horror taking place. We estimate that we've got 10 to 20,000 people of Ukrainian descent here in our city, so it's a strong force within Louisville, and many have been here a long time. We've got some second and third generation immigrants as well. But naturally, when you come from families like this, like my wife is a Greek American with many relatives still in Greece, so many of our Ukrainian descent families have lots of relatives still in Ukraine. So it's a time of tremendous concern for us. Our Office for Globalization, what we've been doing in terms of support so far has been symbols that we can do. I'll be announcing here in a moment some more action that we can take place. But what we've been doing is, putting the City Hall in blue and yellow, the bridge downtown. We've raised the Ukrainian flag downtown, all in show of support, and reached out to different leaders in the community to see how we can support more. I'm the immediate past president of the United States Conference of Mayors, and just this past weekend we had convening of the mayors. We represent over 400 cities in the country, the big cities in the country. And this past Friday we voted unanimously to approve an emergency resolution in support of the Ukrainian people and the democratic values under assault by the Russian government. And then I and the other mayors that were present had virtual meetings with Kiev Mayor Vitaly Klitschko and the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova, and they were both emotional and powerful discussions. We mayors think that we've got challenges here in our cities, and we do, but they pale in comparison to the challenges that the mayors in Ukraine are going through as well. And then it was just Saturday, I believe, when it was reported, Saturday or Sunday, that the mayor of Gostomel, a town near Kiev, Yuri Ilyich Prilkpo, was killed, the mayor, while he was distributing food and medicine to his people. So that would be the act of ultimate public service. All he was trying to do was keep people fed and safe, and he was killed in this atrocity. Now, we have a sister city relationship with Perm in Russia, obviously, and I recognize that maintaining people-to-people relationships with the residents of Perm is important. Our sister city relationships are about building relationships between people and not governments. And over the years, Perm has become quite a good sister city of ours for introducing people in Louisville to Russian talent, culture, and business opportunities. We've hosted numerous delegations here that promote youth engagement and volunteerism, education, women entrepreneurship, business incubation. They're the only city in Russia that has an extreme skate park. That was one thing they were fascinated by when they came here to see our skate park. So they've duplicated that over in Perm. So we had a decision to make on what to do with sister city relationships. A couple cities have terminated their relations, just said it's over. I deeply respect the relationships and know that they're cherished by many residents in both our communities, both Perm and Louisville, and that's a very important connection that we have. So I'm sending a letter to the mayor of Perm, it's going out tomorrow, asking that we both use our mayoral platforms in our sister city relationship to share truth and promote peace and fight for human values, not just in our own cities and our countries, but throughout the world. On Saturday, there was a protest in Perm. About 89 people were detained as a result of that protest. But I felt like just cutting off the relationship would be counterproductive. It might make us feel good to punch somebody in the nose. But I believe the people of Russia, as they learn more about this invasion, are going to be rising up to demand that it stop. So if we can use our sister city relationship as a vehicle for that communication, I think midterm and long term it's a much smarter play. Now, in this letter, I made it very clear to the mayor that the Russian invasion of a sovereign nation is despicable, and the actions that are taking place in terms of the killing of women and children and men must be stopped. I have no idea how he's going to respond to that, but I think it's important if we have these platforms for this type of communication that we're honest about how we feel and hopefully the path that we can take forward here as people, one human people. So we stand firmly, obviously, with the people of Ukraine as well as members of our Ukrainian community. I want to thank the members of our own community for all the good work that they're doing. Natasha, whom you'll be hearing with shortly, has been a great leader for many years helping the Ukrainian community. So thank everybody for what they're doing. And I encourage everybody to do more than what they can do. In talking to the mayor and Klitschko and the ambassador, I mean, their emphasis was, please just keep doing everything you can for us. One is send defensive weapons. We can't do that here in this room, but we can support our federally elected officials and let them know that we support that type of actions. Economic sanctions, they said, please do everything you can on that, including the ban of importing Russian oil that was announced here today. And then on the other side, let's all just be compassionate and kind to everybody. It's difficult within our Ukrainian and Russian, Belarusian communities right now when you see this type of thing taking place over in Europe and say, how do we react to each other right now? Because the fact is, usually when citizens like this come to our city, they become friends. And so they don't want that to be stressed by something like this. So let's try to understand that as best as we can. I'm really glad to see what President Biden is doing, and leaders at the federal government strongly condemning the actions of what Putin has done in the strongest possible terms, exercising our duty as members of NATO as well. Putin had no idea that he was going to unite the rest of the world behind him, and I think he will rue the day that he decided to invade Ukraine. But what is so sad is that we continue to see the pain and the loss of life before that day comes to us. So one last thing is an action that the federal government did to assist Ukrainians in the U.S., which the Department of Homeland Security designated temporary protected status for Ukrainians who are in the United States before March 1st without documentation. So TPS status protects individuals from deportation and makes them eligible for employment authorization and makes them eligible for travel authorization as well. So if you know any Ukrainians who qualify for this protected status, we encourage them to apply for it. They can contact us at our office, or Congressman Yarmouth's office would be the more direct route since this is a federal action. And one last thing, through our Office for Globalization, through Kevin Lynch and Amos Imana, we'll be putting out a message tomorrow asking people that are interested in serving on a task force to come together so we can develop an action plan on how the city can mobilize behind our Ukrainian community, behind Natasha's actions, so that we can be more powerful here in our city. And then we'll figure out what we can do. Then we'll announce a rally in support of Ukraine, hopefully next week, announce those actions before the rally so we can all show up and support the people of Ukraine. So in the meantime, let us look no further than in the eyes and the hearts that you see of the women, the children that are fleeing to countries outside of Ukraine right now, and let that serve as inspiration for us to do the right thing and do everything we can here from our city of Louisville, Kentucky, to help the people of Ukraine. Thank you for coming out tonight. God bless you.
Now I'd like to bring our panelists up to the stage, please. Ambassador Carrie Kavanaugh, Natasha Reimer, and Zhou Yunzhao will be moderating.
Before we get started with our wonderful speakers tonight, I just want to share a couple of things about why this matters to the World Affairs Council. Many of you in this audience know, and many of you do not know, that our organization have been facilitating hundreds of international exchange programs in our almost 40 years history. And through those years, we have hosted numbers of Russian and Ukrainian delegations. And I know that in the early years of this organization, most of our visitors were from the former Soviet Republic countries. So those, seeing what is happening right now hits very close to home, especially looking at a lot of these places that has been shared with us about how beautiful they are and seeing it devastated. So it's very important for us to learn more. We have a lot of friends both there and here. So I'm really delighted to be able to have our guests here tonight to kind of help us unpack a lot of these things. I want to get started with Natasha first, because really thinking about the latest developments we've been hearing constantly on in the news. Based on your work, first of all, tell us what Mulberry International Resources does in Ukraine, and then tell us what you've been hearing from your colleagues on the ground. Last time we spoke, you talked about a lot of the work has been done in Mariupol, which we learned in the last couple of days has been really kind of been bombed and is in pretty bad, it's a hot spot. So tell us a little bit more.
Well, Mulberry International has been providing humanitarian relief and support to at-risk and displaced families and children in eastern Ukraine. we started working there with local organizations and local churches and volunteers. We are a Christian organization that work with the Christian churches on the ground in Ukraine to provide any sort of support, physical, emotional, spiritual, for all the people that have been suffering through this conflict. If you know what happened in 2014, the war broke out in the breakaway republics in Donbas region, in Donetsk and Lugansk areas. So we were strategically placed in Mariupol, which is right on the other side of the front line on the Ukrainian territory, about 10 miles away from the front line. And Mariupol received the majority of the most marginalized people that couldn't flee in 2014 and 2015 to safer areas. People that had more resources or relatives, they would go to Western Ukraine or Central Ukraine away from the fighting. But the people that did not have anything, the most marginalized, the most poor and lacking resources, those people fled to Mariupol. So we received numerous grants. We, in the worst time of 2015, we were feeding people, just 600 people a month, just, hosting them and sheltering them and feeding them warm food, distributing humanitarian supplies and shipping clothing, medicine, and everything that they needed. So we have been there for 8 years. So this, the tragedy is nothing new to our partners on the ground. But of course, what's happening right now pales in comparison what we used to see and deal with. So Mariupol, where majority of our work has been carried out, is in a complete, almost complete blockade. So it doesn't have power, heat, water. It all has been destroyed by shelling, and there's no cellular connection since March 1st. So we tried to evacuate everybody we could. We had 4 different caravans of cars evacuating from the city. We also supported a children's home there, so we evacuated all the children and caregivers and their families out to Western Ukraine, but there were people that chose to stay behind, hunkering down in basements and shelters, just to help people on the ground. It's estimated that about 300,000 people are trapped in Mariupol, and there's no way, we cannot contact them, there's no connection. Today, I received 2 messages recorded from them that they were able to get some connection and to contact us that they were alive, and they are trying to help those that come and people flooding to any of our organizational buildings. We had some churches, we have a children's home, that those buildings have basements, and people just flooding to those basements in protected areas just to be safe from shelling. And as I said, there's no food in the stores, there's no water supply, people are boiling snow and collecting rainwater. So what we're helping right now, we cannot help the people in Mariupol at all, but because I cannot foresee how they could escape right now, because the humanitarian corridors are being bombed every time. They do not. It's the 4th time the humanitarian corridor has been shelled, and the rest of the evacuees couldn't get out. And what we're trying to do is to provide for those people that want to evacuate into Romania, Poland, Western Ukraine, and provide with finances there. Unfortunately, all the banks in the United States are now putting sanctions to any wiring operations. So what we used to have in wire funds to Ukraine is no longer working. So I have to find alternative ways to wire money there. And you have to be very creative, but we were able to find a few ways, so we're trying to support those people that were able to get out to resettle somewhere else. I'm sorry, I can just talk for a long time. You need to interrupt me.
And we'll come back to this too. And to your point, the resilience of the people in Ukraine is incredible. We've heard from some of our past visitors who's whether they're in Kharkiv or some of these other very, very strongly bombed and affected areas, they wouldn't leave until they absolutely had to at the very last minute because they wanted to stay and defend. Well, let's take it back a little bit and give you a little bit of break, and we'll come back to the Kentucky, to our community. But really, Ambassador, you have decades-long experience in the Foreign Service. You've served in many Eastern European posts. You've led the first embassy, U.S. embassy over in Georgia, opened back in 1994. So based on this experience you had, I mean, was this all foreseen? Is this part of something that we should have expected, that Russia would invade Ukraine? I mean, the last time they invaded a country was in Georgia. Was that a precursor to what's happening now?
Actually, sadly, the last time they invaded a country was Ukraine.
Ukraine, well, yeah.
I worked for almost 3 years at our embassy in Moscow. And when I worked there, it was a time where U.S.-Russian relations had actually grown quite close. Gorbachev was in charge. They were doing perestroika and glasnost. George H.W. Bush was president. We were working with them on arms control. It was a very positive time. And it's very disheartening to see how quickly we've moved to what is the polar opposite, a level of fighting that isn't a surprise, but is somewhat anticipated. And how to deal with that, I think, is going to be the challenge of the next several years, if not several decades. Used to be in Moscow on this day, International Women's Day, you would see fireworks over the city. And it was always nice. It was a holiday not celebrated in the United States. But even my wife said, "This is nice, we deserve a day." And they do. And it's really tragic to think that today in Kiev, there's fireworks in the sky. But they're not fireworks of celebration, it's fireworks of destruction. And we've seen on television over 1 million women on the run with children fleeing by foot, by car, by train, any way they can, ripping their families apart to try to get to safety. This will be, for me, I suspect, the most memorable International Women's Day ever, and it's for all the wrong reasons. But it then also reinforces the importance of doing the right thing to find a path out of this. What we're seeing is unfinished business left over from the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Francis Fukuyama wrote a piece, "The End of History, History Didn't End." My university professors, I'm in Louisville, I can say this, at the University of Florida, always said, history never ends. It just keeps going. It may rhyme, it doesn't repeat, and you can shape it. We need to shape it. What we're seeing is we probably didn't shape it well enough. It's not our fault. Putin did this. He chose to do an unjustified, aggressive invasion of a neighboring country. Strangely, he's trying to deny it's a country. He's admitted in the past it's a country. It's recognized by the world as a country. It's recognized by Russia as a country. He's trying to rewrite that in a way that is astounding, but reflects things we've also seen recently in other countries and our own. Questions about the facts, questions about truth. Makes me very glad we're having this discussion today in the Louisville Public Library, free public library, I might add. This is a place where knowledge is important, facts are important, and I think as we look at this, that's an important thing to keep in mind too. But it's an unjustified attack, and it's going to shape what kind of relations can we have with Russia in the future, and what will relations be overall around the world in the future. Just as we're watching this, China's watching this, North Korea's watching this, other adversaries and other friends are watching this. So the importance of picking the right response and doing the right thing is crucial.
Thank you. So we had talked about Ukraine's resilience against this. The government especially has shown a lot of, bravado, courage in resisting such a large country. And they've applied to be part of the EU. What does this mean for its security? What does it mean for the EU to be accepting Ukraine? What does this mean for what is the foreign policy implications in that region?
Yeah, so Ukraine, Georgia, several of the countries of the former Soviet Union have longed to be EU partners, if not members. Mm-hmm. Georgia and Ukraine in particular have longed to be members of NATO, and they've made that known. And if there was an error in foreign policy, it may have been, for them and for us, saying that that was really out there. We've always said, and the U.S. government position on this remains the same, NATO's an association of free countries. Anyone can ask to join NATO, but it doesn't mean you get in. And we were very comfortable saying, we're looking at how you might become a member of NATO. To Georgia, and Putin invaded Georgia first. To Ukraine, Putin invaded Ukraine second. He told us in 2007, don't do this. We did it with the general knowledge they weren't going to become members of NATO or the European Union anytime soon. They weren't ready for it. Their established democracies were fledgling, in some ways, at best fledgling in the early years. But we put that on the table, and it became an irritant for Russia. And that's become the part of the problem. Even now, asking for it probably just riles Putin up more. To be a member of the European Union, every European Union country would have to be comfortable, let's bring Ukraine in. Ukraine brought into the European Union today means you bring a war into the European Union. How would all the European Union members react? It would probably kill the European Union. So I think it's not a real thing either to ask for it or to think right now that they would get it.
Mm-hmm. What Eastern European countries do you see as most vulnerable if Ukraine falls, or especially, a lot of the countries have really stepped up to take them in because they believe that's what could happen to us.
Sure. No, I think the vulnerability is widespread. We saw Putin ask Kazakhstan, would they get involved and help? They said no. I think the Baltic republics, each of which has a Russian population, Latvia in particular, almost 1 million Russians, ethnic Russian population. They're Latvian citizens, but of Russian descent. I think they're nervous too. The distinction there, the Baltic republics are members of NATO. And President Biden was very emphatic in saying, not an inch of NATO territory can be touched that you won't elicit an enormous response from the United States and our NATO partners. And Putin's activity in Ukraine, it's interesting. He has an amazing failure and an amazing success. The amazing failure, his army's doing horribly. It doesn't mean they won't win or can't win. They're just not doing as well as he thought. I think he thought this would be an Iraq War I situation like for the United States. 4 days in, Iraq fell. We pushed them out of Kuwait, it's done. I think he thought a couple of days in, replace the government, you have a friendly government to Russia, I'm done. None of that worked out. Where he succeeded, that many people would say they thought was impossible, he united the NATO alliance. We have changes in Europe going on today with this reminder of the danger Russia poses. Countries that were reluctant to spend money on their own defense budgets are going up. Germany voted an enormous increase in its defense budget. Countries who were neutral and always really cautious about what they would do. Sweden, Finland, historically neutral. Both started raising questions, maybe they want to join NATO. Finland shipped arms to help Ukraine. The Swiss, you get no more neutral than the Swiss. When all the European countries, European Union, the United States, Canada, all of us together agreed harsh sanctions, the Swiss agreed to block Russian bank accounts. This is just not known, but it's a sign, and a very positive sign, and a big success, thank you, Vladimir Putin, for that, that the West will rally together to protect. And we see the threat, we see a common threat. It does mean the future is going to be very different, because it isn't going to be easy to have as friendly a relationship as we could have had in the past, as we did have under the Gorbachev era before Putin. And it doesn't mean we can't get back to that. And I think in part that's what the mayor was getting at too. Louisville has a relationship with Perm. My city in Florida, Jacksonville, had a relationship with Murmansk. We may need those relationships more than ever once we're past this. But it's going to take us a while to get past this.
Absolutely. So that brings us back to Kentucky. And I wanted to get your thoughts, Natasha, since you've done quite a number of work here, and you're very close with the Ukrainian community. What are you hearing from the people here? We've reached out too before this to get some voices on, some of the experiences that many Ukrainians that's here living in Louisville and what they're feeling, their communications with their families. But what are you hearing from our community here? What are they most afraid of? What are they hopeful for?
Well, the community here in Louisville, I just want to say thank you, because it's been an outpouring of such a support to us Ukrainians and organizations that are doing something in Ukraine right now. I had an opportunity to go on some TV channels and speak on to the situation, and the response was just overwhelming. And from Russians, Ukrainians, Americans, other nationalities in Louisville, and it's been, I just want to say thank you for our community that came together to support us. And yeah, I mean, it's Russian, Ukrainians, Georgians, they all stand together against the invasion of a sovereign nation in Europe. But unfortunately, that's not the case on the other side of the pond. And I'm obviously a Ukrainian, but I'm from Crimea. So I get, I'm a Russian-speaking Ukrainian, so I have a lot of friends and family members that are on the other side of this issue, and it's not what we think that they should think. Well, most of the Ukrainians, obviously, they are standing firm in support of their country, but not so much in Russian Federation. And actually, just yesterday or the day before yesterday, they censored Facebook, and I hear some conversation that by the end of the week, they will not have access to the internet. So what they're receiving from, state-sponsored television and censored radio station, a number of radio stations and world news stations were had to be gone because they were censored and they couldn't speak up, including like big ones like BBC. So people get their information from the state-sponsored television, and it's not what we think they're receiving. So unfortunately, that is a hard battle or misunderstanding, to say the least, that we have to deal with. Here we have a support of, Russians and Ukrainians, but overseas in Ukraine, well, mostly in Russia, that doesn't exist, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I would add, it's even against the law to call this a war in Russia. You have to say special military operation to show the extent of the censorship and the extent of rewriting the present perversely, it's not even history as it's unfolding. And I think that's going to be a real challenge.
It's actually, it's 15 years in prison if you disseminate fake information about the so it's not even like, it's as simple as calling it a war or saying something that Russian troops are not successful, or actually voicing exactly how many Russian soldiers have died, because they've changed that number quite a bit. So yeah, it's I don't know, for the lack of a better word, but back to Iron Curtain.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you all know this, but Sister Cities of Louisville was a nonprofit organization, and back in 2020, the World Affairs Council took over the programs for this on behalf of the city. So we manage and administer the Sister City relationships, including PERM. And of course, as the mayor had mentioned before, there's been a lot of concerns about that relationship. But as Ambassador Kavanaugh and Natasha have said, you know, this is the people in Russia are not getting all of the full information about what's happening. And we know from the years of communications we've built up here that people would not support this if they know that this is what is happening. I think I read somewhere that about 60% of the population still really receive their news and information from state TV, probably maybe more now. Ambassador Kavanaugh, I want to get your thoughts on what do you think the chances are that there can be any kind of credible opposition in Russia at this point, and you know, that might perhaps instigate some kind of revolution from within?
Probably very close to zero. I think Putin is a very strong leader. He's moving from authoritarian to totalitarian. This is ratcheting up in his strength. So I don't think there's an ability for that to happen right now. I think the challenge will be, how do you get them to stop fighting in Ukraine? How do you stop the death of civilians there as soon as you can? And then how do Russian citizens and others around Putin react to what is a collapsing economy and the damage he's done to his own country, both economically, but also politically. No one wants to be in a pariah country, and that's going to start sinking in very quickly. In the midst of a fight, it's often very hard to convey that. And I think the other challenge is what comes next. All of us go home, at least I don't sleep nights now, turn on the television and see this horror spilling out, which seems to have no end. And we're hearing from President Zelensky, who's turned out to be an amazing leader. I think surprising. Even those who were close to him, it's like just, he sits in the presidential palace. Moscow, you want to find me, I'm right here. And talking and doing what presidents should do. And if you caught his speech today to the British Parliament, he was channeling Winston Churchill of, we'll fight in the fields, we'll fight in the forest. And I could see him. You could see him in the fields and the forest. And I can see many Ukrainians there fighting. The hard part, what's the role then for the United States? What's the role for NATO? And on television, you'll see a lot of debate of this now. Some of it's helpful, some of it's reckless. Let me bring up two that I think are reckless and I worry about. One, assassinate Putin. Easy to say, probably quite difficult to do. And there's a general reason why countries don't go around assassinating lots of leaders of other countries. One, in the free countries, a lot easier to assassinate. You want to know where President Biden is any day? Turn on TV. He's in Texas today, giving speeches, mixing with people. You want to try to kill Putin? Good chance you fail. You want to try to kill Biden? Better chance he doesn't fail. And that's not the answer. It's not the answer to the Russian people. If you have a leader, we'll kill him if he does things we don't like. But a lot of people are repeating that, at least. The other is should we be part of this war? And how much can we do to help Ukrainians and not become part of the war? President Zelensky is asking in very emotional terms for a no-fly zone. And the United States in different places has set up no-fly zones. One of the things I did at the State Department was work for over almost 2 years on the no-fly zone over Iraq to protect the Kurdish citizens. That was UN authorized, done with the French and the British, worked well. We also had a largely UN authorized operation over Bosnia and another one over Libya. Those were successful too. The difference here is profound, however. Bosnia, Libya, Iraq weren't nuclear powers. They weren't major world powers. We could go to the United Nations and ask to get UN blessing for that kind of operation. Russia has a veto at the United Nations. There will be no United Nations blessing for that kind of operation. And the way we run no-fly zones, it's not a benign thing, it's a very aggressive thing. Basically, anything that takes off that we don't think should be in the air, we blast out of the air. And to make sure our people are safe to blast things out of the air, we blast out all the air defense and the radar systems. And what Zelensky's asking for isn't just planes, stop missiles, stop artillery. And it would really mean we would be involved in a major war with Russia. And that would involve all of our NATO partners in a major war with Russia. And I think they're afraid of that. We're cautious of that. I think part of the caution you see from President Biden is centered exactly on that. I think he sees himself, and I've met him, I'm not working for him, I'm not a spokesman for him, but I believe this. He sees he's got two challenges here. How can America help the Ukrainians as much as possible? And how can he make sure he fulfills his presidential responsibility of protecting American citizens? So he has to do whatever he can to make sure there isn't a war that involves us in a hot war, and as much as he can to help people who are in a hot war to be able to stop that war. And I think they're walking that line. It's a thin line. Other European countries want to help in the same way, but you may have heard this afternoon, Poland said, we'll send fighter planes, but we'll send them to Germany first. So if they go to Ukraine, they come from Germany with the Americans having checked them and made sure they're ready for fighting. Poland is afraid of an attack by Russia, as it should be. But so will Germany, who's also been attacked by Russia in the past, and Germany actually attacked Russia multiple times in the past on its own. But there's a real line there, and it's hard to know where you cross that line. I heard a discussion driving over. I apologize if this answer is too long, but it's important. That was talking about, well, we don't have to worry about Putin using a nuclear weapon because of mutually assured destruction. I wouldn't trust that. I think, and there was a colleague of mine, Bill Burns, had a CIA testified before Congress today and said CIA's assessment isn't that Putin's crazy. CIA's assessment, he's cornered, he feels trapped, he's frustrated, he's angry. That calls for one policy that's really cautious and careful. I don't think Putin's crazy, so I don't think he would use a nuclear weapon against the United States. And I don't think he'd use one against a NATO partner, because he's seen how our alliance has pulled back together again and how strong that is. Were Putin to use a small nuclear weapon in Ukraine, I don't know how the West would answer that. He'd be a pariah. He's a pariah now. But we aren't going to launch a nuclear strike on him, which would give him the ability to launch one back at us. That's mutually assured destruction. That's not going to happen in that way. But there's a danger here. Don't push too far. And, the metaphor for Russians are always bears. If there's a bear in the corner and we've got him surrounded, don't think he'll decide it's a good time to hibernate. It's not what bears do. My son worked for public radio in Alaska. It's never what bears do. Bears get really nervous and angry, and they have huge paws. So our challenge is, how do we make it that the Ukrainians can defend themselves as much as we can? How do we start working on getting humanitarian corridors to help people flee that are trying to flee, and corridors to get humanitarian assistance into Ukraine for people who are staying? Because all of a sudden the electrical system's collapsing, the water's collapsing, the food's missing, and how do we get communications going to where there can be efforts to talk about finding something that stops the fighting? And I think the current government in Washington, but also Paris and London and Berlin, are all looking together at how do we find a package that can do that. And my hope is they can be successful.
Well, you answered quite a number of questions I had on that, a particular nuclear piece. But having said that, short of a boots on the ground approach, we've learned today that we're no longer going to be importing Russian oil. So that was supposed to be the next big step in the sanctions. What do you think? Do you think these sanctions like this will work? If not, what other tools do we have without that? And you especially, your work with these peacekeeping, conflict resolution. How do you see this end? What is there still some kind of a diplomatic solution to this?
Yeah. So as a diplomat, I have to answer the last one first. Diplomats think there's always some sort of diplomatic solution. So I'll put that out there first. Yes. Sanctions. Typically, sanctions aren't great because they have a limited impact. What's going on today, and you hear some people go, oh, this is so slow a response. Today is the 13th day of this war. These are amazingly crippling sanctions, far beyond what anybody ever expected. We've shut down the operation of Russia's central bank. The ruble has plummeted. The banks are closed. The stock exchange is closed. We're seeing at the governmental level, not just the United States, but all our partners, right down to the Swiss, are putting in these amazing financial sanctions. Then we're seeing something I think the Russians never expected. It started with British Petroleum. We're leaving. They had a 20% stake. We're just selling it. We're losing a lot of money. We don't care. We're leaving. Right after them, Shell Oil. We're leaving. All of the corporate structure that made life in Russia pleasant and modern has collapsed more every single day than Russians would ever have imagined. We get used to this in the United States. I was in Europe 10 days ago, and I came home and I went to buy something at the airport and realized I had gone to Europe, I took no money. And I came back and still had no money. And that's okay, because we don't use cash a lot. In Moscow, nobody used cash. Everything was credit cards. All the credit cards stopped working yesterday. All of a sudden, people are scrambling, looking, do you have coins or bills to be able to get on the subway? Because none of the cards work anymore. This means across the country, it spans a dozen time zones, people are sitting here going, what on earth is going on? And why are we doing this? And what is going to come about this? Right now, they don't know the full truth of what's going on, why they're doing it, but they're certainly going to be feeling the impact. It doesn't mean it isn't worse in Ukraine. They're killing people in Ukraine. People are fleeing, their homes are being destroyed. But I think it's a different kind of sanction than we've had in the past. As for diplomacy, we saw through the history of the last century, We can have massive world wars. You don't solve things with the fighting in the end. You solve it with dealing with people as people, sitting down at a table and working out an arrangement that's acceptable enough to a lot of people. It's compromise. World War I ended with one of those that wasn't an arrangement that was acceptable to enough people, didn't have enough compromise. And we saw a couple decades later, we got World War II. The challenge here will be, how do you work up a diplomatic solution that'll be unpalatable to many people, but stop the fighting, let life get back to a more normal path, and maybe give us an opportunity to look at a way forward that we can live together better. And I think that's best done, finding that, sorting that out, not with artillery and missiles and tanks, but by talking. And if any of you are interested in going back to school, we do have a school of diplomacy in Lexington, and this is what we teach.
I
And
graduated from that school. Little plug in.
But I think in the end, that's the answer. And it isn't throw them out of the UN. That came up too. You can't throw Russia out of the UN. Yeah. They'd have to agree they wanted to be thrown out of the UN. and you want the UN. You want the Russians to show up there and have everybody yelling at them. You want the Russians to feel every time you turn around, these are nasty discussions. And I will say, and I had, when I was working at the State Department, several discussions with U.S. senators and in private, the kind that's going on right now with our Supreme Court nominee. And they would ask, how do you get some of these things done? Because you're just talking. And I would always say, well, you have to understand you're talking, but I'm holding a microphone, so it's hard. You know, I talk with my hands. This is a really powerful finger. And it's not because I'm a big guy. I'm probably too big. But this is 330 million people. It's the largest economy on the planet. It's the largest military, most potent military on the planet. And it's all in that finger. And I don't have to poke them, but they see I've got a finger. And I could talk to them really nicely, and we can work out solutions. So we have that. The other thing we have, and it doesn't show up in the finger part, is values. And I think if we're working on the right things for the right reasons, we find lots of people will follow our lead. And I think that's why we've seen the bandwagon on sanctions. That's why we've seen President Biden didn't call McDonald's and say shut down the McDonald's. Mm-hmm. We know Boris Johnson didn't call BP and say give up lots of money. They made those decisions because they see them by values as the right decisions. And diplomacy can use those values in that same package. Our politics, our values, our strength, our economy, and our goodwill, and I think work on finding a way out. And not corner that bear too dangerously.
Well, thank you very much for sharing a lot of that wisdom. And before we close, I know we're really close to we're up at the hour. I just want to ask Natasha if there's anything else you'd like to share before we close with our audience about the work, about anything.
Well, I kind of wanted to continue that conversation about diplomacy and what I have been seeing by communicating with Russians and Ukrainian and people, especially in Russia right now. What I watched yesterday was the press conference of 3 captive Russian soldiers on Ukrainian television, and how they were just sharing with Ukrainian citizens their story, how they got there, and the colonel who was captive there, he had something to say that he said, I understand that you are angry and you have all the right to hate me and to imprison me and to kill me if you want, because I understand if somebody came on my land with the same mission, I probably would have done the same. But what he did say, he said, but resist that urge. See that we were confused, brainwashed, whatever, following orders, and we see that we did not do it voluntarily or, with a happy heart. And he just said, just resist that urge to kill and let us go back after serving the prison term or whatever they deserve, but let us share our story so we can take it back to Russia. Because if you kill us all, there won't be anybody coming back and given an alternate account of what's happening. And I think that was very powerful statement, that if we continue to hate and return hate for hate, even though all those atrocities and tragedy absolutely has to be punished in some way, but if we go down that road that we are no better than the aggressor, and that we need to, as Ambassador Kavanaugh said, that we share common values and we need to bank on that. And I know it's a very painful subject, but if we continue on with what's happening right now, especially what I hear from across the pond, that we can end up as Israel and Palestine, and Russians and Ukrainians hating each other for centuries. So there is a great danger of going down that path right now, and I don't necessarily have like a solution to do that, but just to examine our hearts and just choose love over hate in the midst of circumstances.
Can I tell one more POW story? Another captured Russian soldier captured by Ukrainians. And some of you may have seen this on television. But they disarmed him, they checked he was fine, and they handed him his cell phone so he could call his mother and let her know that he was okay. And it became clear to him they weren't going to hurt him. And again, it just showed that human values overriding. Here's a guy who was just walking down the street shooting at your people. Now, well, you should call home still so they know you're all right.
Thank you. We had reached out to a couple of people and get their reflection. I just want to take a quick few moments to read a couple of things that they had written to us, and we're going to be sharing all of this on our website and in our newsletters as well, so you get a sense that this is really close and very personal to our community. Because as one of them, Alexei, I don't know if he's here or not, but he sent over a short reflection saying that, a dental assistant in our office had her cousin killed a few days ago in southern Ukraine. A sales representative in Louisville has her brother in the front lines in Odessa preparing to be bombed. My mom, who is a local pharmacist, her cousin is a medic in the Ukrainian army and is seeing kids and civilians blown apart by Russia's, quote, liberation operation, close quote. The war may feel far away for most Americans, but it impacts more people than they realize who are right next to them. And then from Yulia, who said, my family has now been hiding in their flat for 5 days. They are extremely fortunate to still have running water and electricity, but don't turn on lights after sundown for the fear of drawing attention. They have another week's worth of food, and my nephew informed me this morning that the Russians took over multiple cell towers, cutting off mobile signal. The local TV tower has been taken over with a Ukrainian TV channel replaced by a Russian one. Oftentimes, one of the things that we try to do here at the World Affairs Council is really help people in our community understand why global issues really matter here. They're not just there. And we try to have these kinds of forums as a space for us to talk about this. And I just want last minute is support and donations. A lot of people has been asking about that. I know there's a lot of websites out there. I think the Washington Post curated some good agencies that you can support. Of course, our Natasha Mober International, I don't know if you're accepting donations, but agencies like this in our community and internationally, I urge you to take a look at them. And I know that our KRM they're going to be looking at what possible, the refugee situation that's going to be coming out of this. That may not be immediate. It could be a couple for some time. But when that happens, we're going to want open homes to support the refugees when they come. Again, please help me and thank our two speakers tonight for sharing.